York's classic rock. Q1043.
Q104.3, Ken Dashow, sitting with the executive producer of this amazing Billy Joel documentary, And So It Goes, Steve Cohen, not the owner of the Mets, the man who is the executive producer of this. Steve, welcome to Q104.3.
Thanks, Ken.
Um, this is one of the most amazing things I've ever seen. Usually in docs, the star goes through it and goes, I don't look so good there. Let's pull this out, or let's back off on that. I have honestly never in my life seen a more naked, honest documentary. This is a man I've loved all my life, thought I knew a bit about him, knew some of it, but I was amazed by what we saw. What
Well,
was, did you go into it with Billy and said, let's just tell the whole story? And he said, yes, warts and all, let's do it.
well, first of all, it's the best compliment you could have given us, because in fact, that's exactly what happened. When I first met with Susan Lacey, we'd had a lot of offers and quite a few requests to tell the story, whether it be a biopic or a documentary, and Billy was not interested. He said, my life is in my songs. I've told my story a million times. I don't want to tell it anymore. And Susan and I met because she's a neighbor. She lives in Sag Harbor. I'm in East Hampton. Years before this, came about, and she had expressed interest. And I said, if you're interested, if he's interested later on, this is something we can explore. Fast forward a couple of years later, or actually a year later, Todd Miller and Sean Hayes from Will and Grace and Tom Hanks and Gary Getzman approach me to pitch Billy on the idea of doing a documentary for HBO, and their suggestion for a filmmaker was Susan Lacey. So the stars aligned, and we all respect HBO's high bar of critical acclaim, and we Billy said, well, let's explore it, and Susan made it very clear, said, if I'm going to do this, you have no editorial say in this. Otherwise, I'm not going to do it. And Billy was like, you know what? All I ask you to do is to be honest.
Wow.
I got nothing to hide.
But
And, that's a nice thing to say in theory, but in practice, the reality was I had to sit with him and go, you realize we got nothing to say. All we can do is provide them information, and we can be participants as far as interviews and archives. But at the end of the day, her narrative is going to be her narrative. And he was like, I respect her. One of the things you got to understand about Susan Lacey is she started American Masters, right? American Masters for 25, 30 years on PBS was the benchmark documentary program that respected artists, not as tabloid personalities. So he already knew that she was going to approach this with gravitas and with seriousness. Jessica Levin was a crazy Billy Joel fan, worked with Susan for 20 years, became the co-director. So between Susan's high arc and Jessica's, in the weeds knowledge about this stuff, they approached this in a very full, comprehensive, technicolor way. And my gig was to show them the stories behind the stories, was to point them in the direction of where you would get if something happened at the Houston Summit in 1978, what was going on around the guys in the band, and what were we doing in Houston in 1978? And was there any adjunct stories that fell into all of that stuff? So, but at the end of the day, there's some uncomfortable stuff in there. There's some places where Billy is very raw. He wasn't going to talk about a lot of this stuff, and he did. Um, and it was probably more uncomfortable for me than for him, because as his friend, it hurts when I see him hurt, but like he was good with it.
please talk to my ex-wife and let her say whatever she wants to say. Said no man I've ever known ever in life. And
It's a
yet you can't tell the story without Elizabeth, but I was just stunned that she's such a big part of it and needs to be, but I'm still stunned, like you just said, to have the cojones to just say, look, my life's an open book on this. Just go do it.
Look, the Elizabeth story is the big story, and it's never been told. And she was vilified in online, in the press. She was a woman who told a bunch of guys that they didn't know what they were talking about, and was married to the rock star. Like in 1979, how do you get away with that stuff without people laughing at you or shutting the door in your face? And she effectively did all of this, at Billy's behest, because, she was the knife. She was the one who had to cut this, Billy had to remain, pristine for a lot of this stuff. And that's a tough role. So she went after their marriage, dissolved, and, she left the business. She went what I call into the witness protection program. Like nobody knew what she did. She developed a completely different life. And I had to, because I knew her as well as I did, and because I knew that this was, if we were going to tell this story, was as important as any other part of Billy's career. She was the muse of the first record. She was the reason he started writing songs. She is part of every one of those songs, and has something to do with, 80% of the material in all of those songs up until Nylon Curtain. So it needed to be said. And Susan Lacey, being a strong woman, being a successful woman in the industry, it was a perfect match. So Elizabeth came in, and you get to learn about what I call the Big Bang, Stranger 52nd Street and Glass Houses, three incredibly monstrous albums that she was at the helm of the success of all of them. So that's the big takeaway from part one,
I mean, when you have an artist, I've been playing his music as a fan and on the air for 40 years. We have not stopped playing those albums, not because we're an oldie station, but because the third and now fourth generation have fallen in love with great songs. That's why we're still playing the Beatles, the Stones. These are evergreens. He's in that pantheon of nobody doesn't like. There's always that person. Why do you play so much Billy Joel music at Q104.3? Like, why do you think? I
Right.
want to put an expletive in there, but why do you think could have played the Garden for the rest of his life, right? That could have been open-ended forever if he chose to. It still would have been filled every night. And it's just remarkable. And the thing that's I've always loved about his show is no lasers, no smoke, and no dancing girls. The most amazing thing is him treating every gig like it's a Holiday Inn by the side of the road. The intimacy, making Madison Square Garden a club show is not easy to do. And that's what it always felt like when he just talks back to the audience or asks the audience questions. One of my favorite Billy Joel moments, and I'd love to share it just to encapsulate it for anybody who didn't go to the garden. He was about to play Piano Man, and he just stopped and said, "You having a good time?" And the place went nuts. He goes, "No, no, not. Oh, New York, blah, blah, blah." How many people have been here before? Ah, more than once. Ah, more than 10 times. Ah, you know
Right.
what I'm going to play next, right? Ah, you really want to hear it again? Place goes nuts. And he shook his head. He goes, because I wouldn't, and went into Piano Man. And the place is, name another star that you or I know in our lives who would just be that naked with an audience going, like, you really fucking want to hear Piano Man again?
Right. Right.
And he looked over at Mark, and Mark Rivera went, let's do
Yeah.
it.
Well, listen, I think, it's kind of an overused term, when you describe him as being sort of an everyman, but that's really what it is. There's a thing I always feel when I'm at the garden shows, and I look around, and when you're in a shower and you sing in the shower, you think you have the greatest voice on the planet. Well, the same thing happens when you're at the garden and you're singing with 18,000 people. You think you're singing just as good as the guy on stage. And then you look at this guy, and he's balding, he's 70 years old, he's a little thick around the waist, and you look at yourself and you're 65 and you're
I'm a
little
little thick
around
around
the
the
way,
waist.
then you got your bald, and you're singing, we didn't start the fire at the top of your lungs. You not only think you sound like him, you think you are him. You trade places with him emotionally for, that period of time. And that collective experience, that energy transfer between you and the artist, he's one of the only people on the planet that can do that consistently, because of who he is. And then you layer on top of it the songs that are so accessible and understandable and relatable. I mean, I just keep saying it's like a no-brainer. Like, of course it's going to feel that great. And that's what I think Jessica and Susan and the team have done in this film, which is allow us to pull back, I say open the hood, and look inside on the guts of these songs. You're going to listen to Stiletto again after you see this film, and you're going to
Yep.
hear it differently.
Yep.
You're going to listen to You May Be Right, and you're going to hear it differently because you know a little bit more about the guy who wrote it and where his head was at that time. And I say Billy is like dumb like a fox. It's like he doesn't have to write new material. He lets you rediscover all of this material in a different light. And that's pretty amazing. It's really good art. It's really good art.
Okay. Now here's the hardest question of the interview. Do you think he's going to play again?
I can't answer that, Ken. I mean, listen,
No, not just your feelings in your heart.
my gut, I don't know. Like, I really don't know. Billy has in so many instances over these years walked away from it and come back and walked away from come back. And every time he does, I think it's a miracle when he comes back. And every time he walks away, I understand why. This is his health. Um, I don't know how he feels honestly about it. He talks about it. He's very vague with all of us when he talks about it because he knows we want us all to be together and do that thing again. But I can't honestly answer. Do I want him to? Do I want to go back to the garden and do this again? Are you kidding me? There's no more fun that I have with my clothes on. So I'm hoping he does, but whatever he does, he's still part of my DNA, and he's still part of the world's DNA, and we get to hear him. It's a gift. I was talking to a couple of people the other day about Ozzy, and saying, it's sad and it's tragic, and we keep losing these people, that are part of our lives, but they've given us a gift. They have given us their legacy, and we have them. And cherishing them now as we get older, I think is the real job for all of us as fans. It's just like making sure that we keep that stuff going and keep that stuff alive. And I'll keep putting out stuff. We keep uncovering little bits of film and little bits of recordings, and the archive process has opened up another vault of things. So I think there's going to be some stuff that we'll be able to put out over the next couple of years that have never before been seen or heard, simply because of how we uncovered them when making the film. So that's stuff to look forward to for sure.
Terrific. Steve Cohen, who put this miracle documentary together. You have to see it on HBO. And so it goes. It's brilliantly done. You mentioned Ozzy. It was a tough week. And what I've always said, I'm a Beatles guy. And Ozzy, he says that every musician I met that the Beatles started it all. It was everything. That was the blast that turned the world from black and white into color. And if you listen to Crazy Train, to me, that's his version of All You Need Is Love. It just comes out like Ozzy style, but it's a song about crazy. That's how it goes. Millions of people living as foes. We gotta learn how to love, forget about hate. That's his All You Need Is Love. And I did get to talk to Billy about John Lennon, who wanted to play with him but didn't want to bother him, and Billy, when he was out on Long Island, didn't want to bother John. One thought from somebody who's been in the music business for as long as you. The Beatles, what do they mean to you? What do you think?
Boy, I'll tell you, that is like asking me what Van Gogh and Rembrandt mean to me. It's like, or what Beethoven means to me. They are part of my life. They are part of my soundtrack. And what's great about the Beatles to me is that I can go years without listening to the Beatles, like literally years. And then I will suddenly turn on my playlist, and I have like all of us have a Beatles playlist with every single album, and I'll play it from start to finish, and I'll rediscover Beatles music every single time I listen to it. My problem is overplaying it. Like, I'll go a year where I'll play Beatles all the time, and then I can't listen to it anymore. But they mean the highlight of this film to me. There's many highlights, but I was the one who got to interview Paul McCartney. I went out to the West Coast, and I've run into Paul with Billy a couple of times, and you're kind of like, oh my God, it's Paul McCartney, and he's very much like Billy, the very, very humble and self-deprecating and make fun of themselves and all that stuff. But I sat with him and we started to talk about Nylon Curtain, and I said to him, Nylon Curtain, Billy has often said, was his sort of Sergeant Pepper. That was his homage to Sergeant Pepper. He wanted to make the studio, and to George Martin. And Paul McCartney very just offhandedly starts telling me the origin story of the Sergeant Pepper album. And I'm sitting in a room with Paul McCartney, who's telling me a story that I know is not going to be in the documentary, but and you say I've been in the business a long time. I don't care how long I've been anywhere. It's a pinch me moment that I have Paul McCartney telling me something that I remember taking the plastic off of that vinyl when I was, however old I was, 10 years old, 15 years old. So I'm very blessed, and being involved with Billy for all of these years has opened the gateway for me in my career to do so many different wonderful things. Um, but we just keep doing it because, like my dad said, if you do what you love, you never work a day in your life. And that's my story.
That and mine as well. Steve Cohen, thanks so much for your time. And so it goes, the Billy Joel documentary on HBO. If you don't see this, you're just missing one of the most important things. You will love this. This is your summer entertainment. This is the thing that breaks the heat. Turn on the air conditioning, watch this. It's going to blow your mind. Thank you so much for putting the effort in and putting this together. It was a gift, a love letter for all of us as
Oh,
well.
thanks, Ken. I'm so happy to have spoken to you about this, and we love New York. It's a love letter to New York as well.
It's our DNA. Thanks, Steve Cohen. Thanks so much. Hope to see you again at the Garden. Fingers crossed.
Who
Who
knows? I
knows?
hope.
New York's classic rock. Q1043.